The moment Marlene said those words, something inside me broke. I need space, Clifford. I need independence. She sat across from me at our kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't taken a sip from. The steam curled into the air, but all I could focus on was her eyes, calm, determined, distant. Like she had rehearsed this speech 100 times before finally saying it out loud. I blinked, my mind scrambling to catch up. We had been married for 11 years. We had a home, a life, inside jokes that only we understood. And now, she was sitting here, telling me she needed space? Independence from what, exactly? My voice came out steadier than I expected. Marlene let out a soft sigh and placed her cup down. I don't know, Clifford. I feel like I never got the chance to be on my own, you know? We got together so young. I love you, I do. But I feel trapped sometimes. Trapped. That word lodged itself in my chest like a shard of glass. I had never been the kind of husband who controlled her, never the kind to hold her back. If she wanted to travel, I supported her. If she wanted to switch careers, I encouraged her. I thought we had a partnership. So, what does this mean? I finally asked. She hesitated. That pause was the longest 3 seconds of my life. I think I need some time apart. Just to figure things out. Time apart. To figure things out. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. There was a sickening weight in my stomach, but I forced myself to keep breathing, to not react too quickly. Maybe she just needed a break, a change in scenery. Maybe this wasn't the beginning of the end. But deep down, something told me it was. Marlene reached across the table and touched my hand. I don't want to hurt you. I just need to understand myself better. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded real answers. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling my entire world tilt on its axis. And then, the worst part came. I think I should move out for a little while. It wasn't a request. It was a decision she had already made. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about finding herself. This wasn't about independence. This was something else. I just didn't know what. Yet, the next few days were a haze. Marlene didn't pack her things immediately, but she was different, distant, preoccupied, as if she had already checked out of our marriage in her mind. She still came home at the usual times, still made small talk, but there was an undercurrent in her behavior that set my nerves on edge. I tried to ignore it. Maybe she really just needed time to breathe. Maybe I had been overthinking it. But then I noticed the late nights. At first, it was just one. She claimed she had met up with an old friend from college. A woman named Trish. I knew Trish. Well, I thought I did. I had met her a few times, and as far as I remembered, she had moved across the country 3 years ago. Trish is back in town? I had asked, raising an eyebrow. Marlene hesitated for just a fraction of a second, so brief I almost missed it. Yeah, just for a few weeks. She's going through a divorce, so I'm helping her out. Something in my gut twisted. That wasn't how Marlene usually talked about friends. She was never the comforting shoulder type, and Trish had never been that close to her. But I swallowed my suspicions. I wanted to believe her. I had to believe her. But then the pattern continued. She started coming home later and later. She stopped checking in. And when she was home, she was glued to her phone, constantly texting. The first time I asked her about it, she laughed it off. Oh, come on, Clifford. Do I need to report my every move now? That one stung. I wasn't the controlling husband. I had never been that guy. But she was making me feel like one, just for asking simple questions. And then I saw the first undeniable sign. One night, around 11, she was in the shower, and her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Just one message. I wasn't the kind of man who went through his wife's things. But something about that message made my blood run cold. The screen lit up, and for a brief moment, I saw the name. Not Trish. A man's name. And the message? Tonight was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My legs moved on their own, carrying me to the nightstand, but just as I reached for the phone, I stopped myself. If I read that message, if I opened her phone, there would be no going back. So I just stood there, frozen, heart pounding. And then I did something I never thought I would do. I walked out of the bedroom, grabbed my jacket, and left the house. I needed air. I needed to think. Was this it? Was this what she meant by independence? Had she already replaced me? I wandered through the dark streets, my thoughts racing. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted so badly to be wrong. But deep down, I already knew. Marlene had found her freedom, and I was no longer a part of it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Marlene slept soundly beside me. It felt surreal. This woman, the one I had built a life with, now felt like a stranger in my own home. I couldn't unsee that message. I couldn't pretend it was nothing. And yet, I still had no proof. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe it was some old friend I hadn't heard about. Maybe. No, that message wasn't the kind you sent to an old friend. I turned on my side and studied her sleeping face. She looked peaceful, relaxed. She had spent the last few weeks talking about needing space, needing independence, but here she was, sleeping in our bed like nothing had changed. Like she wasn't lying to me. A thought occurred to me then. If I confronted her now, she'd have time to cover her tracks. She'd have explanations, maybe even tears. She'd make me feel crazy for suspecting anything at all. No, I needed to be sure before I said anything. I needed to catch her in the truth. The next morning, I left for work as usual, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't focus on emails or meetings. My world had been knocked off its axis, and I had no idea what to do next. Then, around noon, I made a decision. I took an early lunch and drove to a quiet spot near our house. I waited. Marlene had taken the day off, claiming she needed time to think. But I had a sinking feeling she wasn't spending the day alone. And I was right. At exactly 12:45, a car I didn't recognize pulled up in front of our house. A sleek, dark-colored sedan. Expensive. Not the kind of car her friends drove. I watched from a distance, my stomach twisting into knots. The driver didn't get out right away. He sat there for a moment, as if waiting for something. Then, the front door of my house swung open, and Marlene stepped outside. She was smiling. Not just any smile, the kind of smile she used to give me when we were first dating. The kind of smile that made me feel like the only man in the world. And she was giving it to him. I couldn't see his face from where I was parked, but I saw the way he leaned toward her as she slid into the passenger seat. The way she touched his arm. The way she laughed at something he said. And just like that, they drove off. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. There was no denying it anymore. She wasn't just thinking about leaving me. She had already left, she just hadn't bothered to tell me. But I still had questions. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? I started the engine and pulled out onto the road, following them at a distance. I needed answers. I followed them, keeping my distance. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wasn't even sure what I expected to find, but something in me refused to just sit back and accept this. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. They drove through town, passing all the usual places, our favorite diner, the park where we used to take evening walks, even the little bookstore Marlene used to love. The symbolism of it all made my stomach churn. How many times had I assumed she was at home or out running errands while she was actually with him? Finally, they pulled into a parking lot behind a high-end restaurant. Not the kind of place you went for a casual lunch. This was a place for anniversaries, special occasions, romantic evenings. I parked a few spaces away and watched as they got out. That's when I finally saw him. He was older than me, maybe by 10 years. Sharp suit, expensive watch, that air of confidence that came from either money or power, probably both. He held the car door open for Marlene, and she reached out to touch his chest as she stepped out. That simple gesture felt like a dagger to my ribs. They walked inside together, and I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing. I could have confronted them right then and there. I could have walked in, caused a scene, demanded answers. But something held me back. No. If I was going to do this, I needed to be smart. Instead of barging in, I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Her walking beside him. Her laughing at something he said. The way he placed his hand on the small of her back as they entered the restaurant. Evidence. I didn't even know why I was collecting it. Maybe for proof. Maybe just to make it all feel real. Because even now, part of me still didn't want to believe it. Marlene, my wife, the woman I had loved for over a decade, was cheating on me. And not just cheating. She had built an entirely separate life, right under my nose. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, watching from a distance. I didn't need to hear their conversation to know what was being said. I could see it in the way she leaned in, the way she smiled, the way he looked at her like she belonged to him. Then something unexpected happened. Marlene glanced at her phone, frowned, and suddenly stood up. The man reached for her hand, trying to get her to stay, but she shook her head. She looked frustrated. I had no idea what had just happened, but she was leaving. Alone. I sank down in my seat as she walked briskly back to the car, got in, and pulled out of the parking lot. The man stayed behind. He looked irritated. He pulled out his own phone, dialed the number, and paced outside the restaurant as he talked. I hesitated for a second, then made a snap decision. I got out of my car and walked toward him. As I walked toward him, every nerve in my body screamed for me to turn back. This was insane. What was I even planning to do? Introduce myself as the husband of the woman he was secretly seeing? Confront him? Threaten him? I had no plan. Just a desperate need for answers. The man was pacing outside the restaurant, phone pressed to his ear, his face twisted in frustration. He hadn't noticed me yet. What do you mean you changed your mind? He snapped into the phone. You don't get to pull this now, Marlene. We had a plan. A plan. I stopped in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. She was leaving me for him. That much was obvious now. But something had shifted. Something had made her back out at the last second. I took another step closer, my shoes crunching against the gravel. He turned sharply, noticing me for the first time. His expression darkened, but he didn't hang up. Instead, he turned away, lowering his voice. I have to go. I watched as he shoved his phone into his pocket and turned back to me, eyeing me like he wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or concerned. Can I help you? His voice was calm, controlled. He wasn't the least bit rattled. I studied him. Now that I was up close, I could see the details. The silver at his temples, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. He was older, yes, but polished. Confident. The kind of man who had everything figured out. I think you already know who I am, I said quietly. He exhaled sharply and shook his head with a smirk. Yeah, I had a feeling this was coming. The arrogance in his tone made my blood boil. How long? I asked, my voice steady even though I felt anything but. Does it matter? He replied. I took a step closer. It does to me. He considered me for a long moment, then let out a short breath. A year. Maybe more. We met through work. It started slow. She was unhappy. She needed something more. I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to control the storm inside me. More? More than what? His smirk faded. More than you. I could have hit him. Right then. I could have lost it. But I didn't. Instead, I forced myself to breathe. To process. She was leaving me for you, I said. But she backed out. His expression tightened. He didn't like being reminded of that. For now, he muttered. She's scared. She's second-guessing. But she'll come around. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Like he was certain. Like he owned her. I shook my head. You don't know her as well as you think. He let out a low chuckle. Don't I? I stared at him. I had gotten what I came for. So I turned and walked away. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about me. I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving that restaurant. My mind was a tangled mess of emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion. But beneath it all, something else had taken root. Clarity. For the first time, I saw everything as it truly was. Marlene had already made her choice long before she ever said the words I need independence. She had been living a double life, stringing me along while she tested the waters with another man. She had plans that didn't include me. And yet, something had changed. She had backed out. Why? I needed to know. By the time I pulled back into our driveway, the sun had set, casting long shadows over the house we had built together. It felt different now. Colder. Like it no longer belonged to me. I stepped inside, half expecting her to be gone. But she was there, curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. She looked up when I walked in, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Panic. She knew. She knew I had seen her. You're home late, she said, her voice careful. I shut the door behind me, keeping my movements slow, deliberate. Yeah, I had some things to take care of. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her phone. Everything okay? I studied her. She was testing the waters, trying to gauge how much I knew. I could have confronted her right then and there. Thrown everything in her face, the messages, the meetings, the man she had planned to run away with. But no, I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Instead, I sat down across from her, resting my elbows on my knees. You remember when we first got married? I asked. Her eyebrows pulled together in confusion. What? That first year, I continued. We had nothing. Tiny apartment, barely enough money for rent. But we were happy. Do you remember? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember. I used to come home late back then too, I said. Working extra hours, trying to make things better for us. And every night, you'd be waiting up for me. We'd talk for hours, dreaming about the life we were building. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't say anything. I leaned forward. Tell me, Marlene, when did that stop being enough for you? She flinched. Just barely. Clifford, save it. I cut in, my voice calm but firm. I don't need your rehearsed excuses. I just want the truth. When did you decide I wasn't enough? Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I saw something flash in her eyes, guilt. But she shoved it down quickly. You don't understand, she murmured. Then help me understand, I challenged. She hesitated again, then shook her head. I don't know, Clifford. It just happened. I didn't plan for this. I let out a low chuckle. Didn't plan for it? I repeated. That's funny, because I had a conversation today that made it pretty clear you did plan for this. That you and him had everything mapped out. Her face drained of color. You talked to him? Silence. That was all the confirmation I needed. I stood up, towering over her. Yeah, I did. And you know what? He seemed pretty confident that you'd come crawling back to him. Her breath came in shallow gasps now. It's not like that, eh? Then tell me how it is, I snapped. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I shook my head, stepping back. That's what I thought. For the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. Not the woman I had married. Not the partner I had built a life with. Just a coward. A selfish, broken person who had gotten lost in her own lies. And I was done waiting for her to find her way back. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the stairs. Where are you going? She called after me. I didn't stop. Didn't turn around. To start packing, I said. Enjoy your independence, Marlene. You just got exactly what you wanted. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Because for once, I was the one walking away. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was tormented by thoughts of Marlene or the betrayal that had ripped my life apart. No, for the first time in weeks, months, maybe, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. There was no more doubt, no more trying to understand her actions. I had spent too long waiting for an explanation that would never come, hoping she would tell me something that would make it all make sense. But it wouldn't. There was no logic in betrayal. No reason that could justify the choices she had made. She had wanted independence. And now, she had it. By morning, I was done packing. I had stuffed the essentials into my suitcase, clothes, documents, my laptop. The rest of my things? They didn't matter. The house, the furniture, the framed photos of us that once held meaning, they were just remnants of a life that no longer existed. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard her voice behind me. You're actually leaving? Marlene stood at the bottom of the staircase, barefoot, her arms wrapped around herself. Her hair was a mess, her face drawn with exhaustion. It struck me then, she looked lost. Not victorious. Not relieved. Lost. I met her gaze, my grip tightening around the handle of my suitcase. Yeah, I am. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For weeks, she had pushed for this. Talked about needing space, about wanting freedom. She had whispered promises to another man, entertained the fantasy of a new life where I was nothing more than a memory. And now, when faced with the reality of that choice, she suddenly had nothing to say. I didn't think you'd actually go, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I let out a bitter laugh. You expected me to just sit around and wait for you to make up your mind? She flinched, looking away. I thought we'd have more time to figure things out. I shook my head. No, Marlene. You already figured things out. I was just the last to know. A tense silence settled between us. Finally, she took a hesitant step forward. Clifford, don't, I interrupted, exhaling sharply. Don't try to explain. Don't try to backtrack. You made your decision. Own it. Her breath hitched. I never wanted it to be like this, she murmured. I studied her face, searching for any hint of real remorse. And maybe, just maybe, it was there. But it didn't change anything. Well, I said, adjusting my grip on my suitcase. It is. Without another word, I brushed past her, heading for the door. And then, just as I reached for the handle, he's not what I thought he was. I froze. The confession hung in the air between us, fragile and raw. Slowly, I turned around. Marlene was still standing in the same spot, but something in her posture had changed. The confidence, the defiance, it was gone. What? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. She swallowed hard. I thought he was different, that he really cared. But after I left the restaurant yesterday, he called me. Told me to stop playing games, that I was wasting his time. I stared at her, unblinking. So what are you saying, Marlene? That this whole thing, everything you threw away, was for nothing? She looked down, shaking her head. I don't know. For the first time in this entire mess, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just emptiness. She had thrown away our marriage for a man who saw her as disposable. And now, she was realizing too late that she had lost everything. I could have pitied her. But I didn't. That's not my problem anymore, I said. Marlene looked up at me, eyes pleading. Clifford, can we talk? I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. There's nothing left to talk about, Marlene. She took a step forward, her voice desperate now. I just need time to. No. She froze. You had time, I said. You had years with me. And when you felt something was missing, you didn't come to me. You didn't try to fix things. You just left. Her eyes filled with tears. I made a mistake. I nodded. Yeah, you did. For a split second, I almost caved. Almost let myself feel sorry for her. But then I remembered the text message. The restaurant. The way she had smiled at him. And just like that, the last piece of me that still cared disappeared. Goodbye, Marlene. And with that, I walked out the door without looking back. The moment I stepped out of that house, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't instant relief. It wasn't some grand moment of triumph. But it was freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind Marlene had been chasing, the kind wrapped in secrecy, in whispered phone calls, in a fantasy that had crumbled the second it met reality. No, this was something different. It was the realization that I had nothing left tying me to her. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like a good thing. I checked into a hotel that night. I could have stayed with a friend, but I needed space. I needed silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, trying to process everything. The betrayal. The lies. The way she had looked at me at the end, as if she had only just realized what she had done. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. She had made her choice. And I had finally made mine. The divorce was inevitable. I didn't drag it out. I didn't play games. I simply handed over the papers and let her deal with the consequences of her own actions. She signed them without a fight. I don't think she had any energy left to fight. She moved out of the house not long after. I didn't ask where she went. It wasn't my concern anymore. A few months later, I heard through mutual friends that the guy, the one she had risked everything for, had ghosted her completely. I didn't feel sorry for her. Some people learn their lessons too late. But I wasn't going to be one of them. 1 year later. It's strange how time changes things. A year ago, I thought my life had ended. I thought everything I had built had crumbled beyond repair. But now? Now, I'm standing on the balcony of my new place, one that's mine, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I have a new job, new friends, a life that isn't defined by the person who walked away from me. And I'm happy. Truly, genuinely happy. Not because I found someone new. Not because I got revenge. But because I finally understand something that Marlene never did. Freedom isn't about running away from something. It's about knowing when to let go. And I have. For good.